The young man, not yet emperor, sat in a small room near the Palatine and turned over in his hands a worn volume of discourses that his teacher had drawn from his own shelf and pressed upon him without ceremony. Junius Rusticus, older, sterner, a Stoic of the old Roman cut, watched him read in silence, the way one watches a tree take root in soil it does not yet understand. What passed between them in that hour, Marcus would remember, decades later, by lamplight in a tent on the Danube, when he sat down to make a list of the people to whom he owed his soul. The list is the first book of the Meditations. It is the strangest opening to a philosophical work that has come down to us from antiquity. Before Marcus permits himself a single line of doctrine, before he writes one of the austere maxims for which the book is now known, he writes 17 consecutive entries that begin, in George Long's faithful old rendering, with the words, "From my grandfather Verus, from the reputation and remembrance of my father, from my mother, from my great-grandfather, and onward through tutors, philosophers, brothers, friends, and at last, in the longest entry of all, from the gods." He names them. He says what each gave him. He does not thank them in the modern manner, with sentiment, with effusion. He records the debt. This is the principle we are to consider. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the known world, the sovereign of Rome, at the height of her reach, begins his private notebook by accounting for what he did not make himself. He begins, that is, with gratitude. But gratitude understood not as feeling, not as the warm rush one is told to cultivate at table or at bedside, but as something older and harder. Gratitude as ledger, gratitude as inheritance acknowledged, gratitude as a debt that, having been incurred, must shape the rest of one's conduct. Let us reflect on what he writes of Rusticus, the teacher who handed him the book. From Rusticus, I received the impression that my character required improvement and discipline, and from him I learned not to be led astray to sophistic emulation, nor to writing on speculative matters, nor to delivering little hortatory orations, nor to showing myself off as a man who practices much discipline, or does benevolent acts in order to make a display. The catalogue continues. Rusticus taught him to write plain letters. Rusticus taught him to be easily reconciled with those who had given offense, as soon as they themselves wished it. Rusticus, Marcus says simply, gave him the works of Epictetus from his own library, a book passed from one hand to another. A teacher's shelf made the student's mind. This is the matter we will sit with for the next half hour. We will examine what Marcus meant by gratitude, why he placed it before all other things in the work he wrote only for himself, and what it would mean for us, who read him now, to receive his accounting in the spirit in which he set it down. We will look at the man at the moment he wrote, in the camp beyond the river, in the cold of a frontier he had not chosen, and we will consider what is asked of a person who admits plainly that everything they value was given to them. To understand Marcus's first book, one must understand where he was when he wrote it. The Meditations were not composed in the comfort of the imperial palace. They were not the leisured reflections of a man in his study. They were, so far as we can determine, from the headings of certain books that have survived, written in the field during the long Marcomannic Wars on the northern frontier of the empire, in the years roughly between 170 and 180 of the Common Era. The second book bears the heading, Written among the Quadi on the Granua, The third, written at Carnuntum. These are not literary flourishes. These are the place names of a war that lasted longer than Marcus had reigned in peace, fought against Germanic peoples whose lands lay beyond the Danube, in territory the Romans called Pannonia and Noricum, in winters that the Italian-born emperor was not bred for. He was by then a man past 50. He had buried several of his children, including a son, Verus, who had died young and would in time bury more. His co-emperor, Lucius Verus, with whom he had ruled for the first years of his principate, was already dead. His wife Faustina would die during the campaigns. A great plague, brought back by the legions from the Eastern Wars, had moved through the empire and continued to move, killing without distinction of rank, and would in time, by most accounts, kill Marcus himself. He had no taste for war. He had been trained for philosophy, for jurisprudence, for the slow administrative work of an empire at peace. But the frontier had broken, and so the philosopher went north. We are told he kept the imperial business by day and wrote at night. The tent would have been a soldier's tent of the better sort, lit by a single lamp, the air smelling of damp wool and pitch. Outside, the noises of a camp settling for the night, the watchwords called, the horses, the cold of Central Europe in a season for which Rome had no proper word. Inside, an aging man with a stylus, writing in Greek, which was for him the language of philosophy as Latin was the language of command, setting down for no audience whatever the thoughts he wished to hold himself to. It is in this circumstance that he writes the first book, and one must consider what an extraordinary thing this is. A man at the end of a long career, a man who has held absolute power for nearly 2 decades, a man surrounded by death and by the administrative weight of a failing frontier, sits down to write a book and begins it not with policy, not with self-justification, not with the catalogue of his deeds, but with the catalogue of his teachers. He begins with what he was given. The names he writes are largely names that mean nothing to us now without his book. Diognetus, who taught him not to busy himself about trifling things and not to give credit to what was said by miracle workers about incantations and the driving away of demons. Apollonius, who taught him freedom of will and undeviating steadiness of purpose. Sextus, who showed him a household governed in a kindly manner. Alexander the grammarian, who taught him to refrain from fault-finding. Fronto, his rhetoric master, from whom he learned what envy and duplicity and hypocrisy look like in a tyrant. Catullus, Severus, Maximus. The list goes on. Some of these men we know from other sources. Most we know only because Marcus remembered them. And remember, the Meditations were not published in his lifetime. He did not write the first book to honor these men publicly. He wrote it to honor them privately, to himself, so that he, alone in the tent, would not forget what he was made of and by whom. The longest entry in that first book, longer than any other and worth the slow reading, is the one he addresses to the gods. From the gods I received that I had good grandfathers, good parents, a good sister, good teachers, good associates, good kinsmen and friends, nearly everything good. He goes on. He thanks the gods that he was not hurried into any offense against any of them, though he had a disposition that, if opportunity had been given, might have led him to do something of this kind. He thanks them that he was preserved from greater faults in his youth. He thanks them that though he often had occasion to be angry with his brother, He never gave way to it. He thanks them that the children he was given were neither deformed in body nor stupid. He thanks them with a directness that startles for dreams that helped him, including a dream that gave him a remedy for a spitting of blood and for giddiness, a philosopher's prayer of gratitude, written by a man who knew that he had been carried in his 50-odd years by a great number of hands. Now, what does the principle look like when it is doing its work? Let us follow it into Marcus's conduct, as he himself reports it to himself. Consider first the matter of his accession. Marcus did not seek to be emperor. He had been adopted into the imperial family by Antoninus Pius, who had himself been adopted by Hadrian on the condition that he in turn adopt the young Marcus. When Antoninus died in 161, Marcus became emperor, and his first act was to insist that his adoptive brother Lucius Verus be raised to co-emperor with him, against the apparent intention that he should rule alone. The historians record this as a gesture of fraternal piety. Marcus, in his own account, records it as something else. From his adoptive father, Antoninus, he writes that he learned mildness of temper and unchangeable resolution in the things which had been determined after due deliberation, and no vainglory in those things which men call honors. He records, with great care, in the longest portrait of any man in the first book, what Antoninus was like. Read that passage with attention. "Take care that thou art not made into a Caesar," he writes elsewhere in the Meditations, "that thou art not dyed with this dye." And then, "Reverence the gods and help men. Short is life. There is only one fruit of this earthly life, a pious disposition and social acts. And, in everything act as a disciple of Antoninus. Remember his constancy in every act which was conformable to reason, and his evenness in all things, and his piety, and the serenity of his countenance, and his sweetness, and his disregard of empty fame, and his efforts to understand things." This is the principle at work. Marcus does not say, "I am emperor, let me consider how to rule." He says, "I had a father. Let me consider how he ruled, and let me rule as he did." The gratitude is not ornamental, it is structural. It tells him what to do when he does not know what to do. He looks back to the man he was given and acts as that man would have acted. Consider next the matter of his teachers. We are told by the ancient biographer in the Historia Augusta, which one must read with care, but which preserves things otherwise lost, that Marcus, as emperor, set up statues in gold to his deceased teachers, and visited their tombs and offered sacrifices there. Whether this is wholly true, or whether the biographer has embellished, the disposition is consistent with what Marcus writes in the first book. The teachers are not background figures. They are the agents by which he became the man writing. And consider third, the strange and moving passage in which he thanks the gods that when he became enamored of philosophy, he did not fall in with any sophist and did not waste his time in the writing of histories or in the solving of syllogisms, or occupy himself about the investigation of meteoric phenomena. He thanks them, that is, that he was given good teachers and not bad ones. He knows that this was luck. He knows that another young man with another set of tutors would have become someone else. He does not credit himself with his own seriousness. He credits the men who taught him to be serious. Here we touch what is hardest in the principle, and what most distinguishes Marcus's gratitude from the cheerful version that has become familiar to us. Marcus does not say, "I have made myself." He does not say, "My virtues are my own." He says plainly and repeatedly that he was given what he has. From his grandfather, good morals and the government of his temper. From his mother, piety and beneficence and abstinence, not only from evil deeds, but from evil thoughts, and a simplicity in his way of living, far removed from the habits of the rich. From his tutor, that he was neither of the green nor of the blue party at the games, neither a partisan of the Parmularius nor the Scutarius among the gladiators. From his brother Severus, the conception of a polity in which there is the same law for all, a polity administered with regard to equal rights and equal freedom of speech, and a kingly government which respects most of all the freedom of the governed. The man who would write, in the second book, "Begin the morning by saying to thyself, I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial," and who would tell himself to bear with these people because they are kindred. This same man begins his work by saying that he himself was made by the kindness of others. The pessimism about humanity that is sometimes attributed to him does not begin in resentment. It begins in a profound awareness that he too would have been one of those busybodies and arrogant men had he not been given what he was given. This is the structural shape of Marcus's gratitude. It is not a feeling that warms him. It is a recognition that locates him. He knows where he stands because he knows on whose shoulders he is standing. And because he knows this, he knows what he owes. Let us now state the lesson plainly, as Marcus would have stated it to himself. The first thing to be said is that for the Stoic, gratitude is not optional sentiment, but accurate perception. To be grateful is to see correctly. The ungrateful man, in the Stoic understanding, is not merely impolite, he is in error. He thinks he made himself. He thinks his virtues are his own production, his understanding, his own achievement, his good character, a thing he assembled by his own efforts. He is mistaken about the world. He has not noticed that he received a language he did not invent, a body he did not engineer, a city he did not build, parents he did not choose, teachers who happened to be in the room at the moment he was ready to learn. The grateful man is simply the man who has noticed these things. The second thing to be said is that this kind of gratitude carries with it a debt, and the debt is not paid by feeling, but by conduct. Marcus does not, in the first book, weep over his teachers. He does not lavish praise. He records, in restrained and almost legal language, what each gave him. And the work of the rest of the book, indeed of the rest of his life, as we have it through these notebooks, is to live in such a way that the gift was not wasted. The debt to one's teachers is paid by becoming, oneself, a person worth teaching from. The debt to one's parents is paid by becoming oneself, the kind of person they hope to bring into the world. The debt to the gods, or to whatever order of things one believes oneself to be inside of, is paid by acting, while alive, in accordance with the reason one has been given. The third thing, and this is harder, is that Marcus's gratitude includes thanks for what he did not receive and for what was withheld. He thanks the gods that he was not hurried into offenses. He thanks them that his time at court did not corrupt him further than it did. He thanks them, in effect, for the limits placed upon him by circumstance. This is not the cheerful gratitude that lists only blessings. This is the harder gratitude that recognizes that the things one was spared are also gifts, that the temptations one was not exposed to, the disasters that fell on others and not on oneself, the corruptions one did not have the opportunity to indulge are also part of the inheritance. The fourth thing, and this is hardest of all, is that the principle of gratitude as inheritance has implications for how one carries oneself in the world. If you did not make yourself, you cannot be too proud of yourself. If you are given what you have, you cannot despise those who were given less. If your virtues are debts, your virtues are not for display. Notice that almost every entry in Marcus's first book describes a quality he learned, not a quality he possesses. He does not say, "I am temperate." He says, "From so-and-so, I learned temperance." The grammar matters. The self is not a fortress of achievements. The self is a confluence of gifts. And here we come to what Rusticus did in the small room near the Palatine, when he reached up to his own shelf and took down the Discourses of Epictetus and handed them to the young Marcus. He gave him a book. He gave him, in giving the book, the line of teaching that ran from Epictetus back through Musonius Rufus and forward into Marcus's own life and, through the meditations, forward again to us. The gesture was small. The consequence was that an emperor, decades later, on a cold river in a country he did not love, would write the book we have, and we would read it. This is what the principle teaches. You are sitting in a room. Books have been placed in your hands by people who themselves receive them from others. Words have been spoken to you by teachers who receive them from teachers. The character you take for your own is a character laid down, layer by layer, by the kindness and sometimes by the severity of others. To pretend otherwise is to be in error about the world. To accept this and to act in accordance with the acceptance is to begin the work of Stoicism. Consider, in closing, what Marcus does not do in the first book of the Meditations. He does not complain about the teachers who failed him. He does not, in this book, list his enemies. He does not catalogue his griefs. He does not, although he had reasons enough, dwell on what was taken from him or what he was made to bear. The first book is given over entirely to what he was given. It is striking, when one considers it, that a man at war, at the end of his strength, surrounded by death, should begin his private notebook in this way. One might have expected a different opening. One might have expected the meditations on death that come later, or the reminders to himself to bear the burdens of office, or the bitter observations about court life. These come in their turn, but they come after. First comes the accounting of what he owed. You may ask yourself, as the lamp burns low and the tent grows cold, what your own first book would contain. Not the list of your achievements, not the list of your grievances, not the explanations you have prepared for who you turned out to be, but the simple, restrained accounting of what you were given and by whom. The teachers, whose names mean nothing to anyone but you. The parent, whose particular kind of patience shaped your own. The friend, who at the right moment said the thing you needed to hear. The book that was handed to you by someone who, perhaps, did not even know they were handing it to you. And then you may ask the harder question, which is the question Marcus carried with him for the rest of the meditations into every passage on duty and on death and on the morning's resolve. The question is this: given what you have been given, what is it that you owe? Not to repay, For the debt cannot be repaid to the dead, and is in any case not the kind of debt that can be settled, but to honor, to live in such a way that the gift was not wasted on you. The wise man, we are told, does not boast of his virtues, because he knows whose virtues they are. He knows the room in which the book was handed to him. He knows the shelf from which it was taken. He knows that, of all the things in his life, the most important of them came to him from somewhere else. It is thus, and only thus, that one begins.